In today's video, I'm going to give you a step-by-step tutorial on the exact process I use to edit night lapses. In this case, I'm going to be using photos from the brand new GoPro Hero 10, but this tutorial will work for pretty much any camera that you have that you'd like to edit night lapse photos from. This tutorial is not exclusive to GoPro, but in this case, I am using GoPro footage as my sample footage. All right, so first thing you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna wanna make sure your GoPro photos have been copied to your computer. So if you're gonna copy it by directly plugging in the camera or using a USB drive, that's fine. Just make sure the photos are present on the computer before you get started. For today's tutorial, I'm going to be using Windows 10 operating system, and I'm going to be using Adobe Lightroom Classic and also Adobe Premiere Pro. Now, a lot of these steps you could use other photo and video editing software for. It doesn't have to be Lightroom and Premiere Pro, but in this case, for the photo editing part, I do highly recommend Lightroom. Lightroom saves you a lot of time because you're able to synchronize all of your settings on one photo to all of the other hundreds or thousands of photos with one click. That saves a ton of time. Now, after you edit the photos in Lightroom Classic, if you don't have Premiere Pro, you'll be able to take those photos and edit them in any video editor. So the steps that I'm going to show you in Premiere Pro, you could do in DaVinci Resolve, you could do in Final Cut, you could do it in pretty much any editing software of your choice. Let's get started. So once those photos have been copied to the computer, the first step we're going to take here is we are going to open Adobe Lightroom Classic. Once Lightroom is open, you're going to go up here to File, and you're going to select Import Photos and Video. You'll then want to find the folder that you're going to import your photos from. In my case, I have them here in a folder called October 1st, 2021 Night Lapse. And the actual .gpr files are located in a RAW folder. In this case, I have 833 photos. I'm going to make sure they're all checked here, and then I'm going to select Import. Premiere Pro is then going to proceed to import all of those. And you'll see the progress bar right up here. Now it's going to say 2 operations in progress. Usually the initial import is going to go pretty quickly, but then the secondary process is loading all of these thumbnails here. It's called fetching initial previews. For this part, it'll sometimes take a while to load, and I don't always let it load entirely, but it doesn't matter if you let it load up there, you can still proceed to work on this. So what I do here is I look down to where I have a photo that would be approximately the average of the night lapse. And what I mean by that is I'm looking for a photo that has an average amount of darkness. In other words, I don't want to pick one from the beginning like this first one here when the sky is all bright still. I want to pick one from the middle of the night. So in this case, I'm going to pick photo number 222 down here. So this is our raw photo right here, and it already looks pretty good. There's a lot of stars. You can kind of see the Milky Way pattern up here. There's a brighter object here, probably a planet that looks like maybe Saturn based on where that is in the sky. But what I want to do first is I want to go over here to the develop setting, and I want to scroll way down toward the bottom, and I want to click enable profile correction. Then for the make of the camera, I'm going to select GoPro. Now it's going to default to Fusion. This of course is not the Fusion. I'm going to select Hero 7 Black. Now, even though this does not say Hero 10 Black, you can pick Hero 7 Black and it's going to have a similar lens profile. This is going to allow us to correct the horizon. The default right now has quite a bow to the horizon here because I shot it in wide angle and I had it pointed up. So what I would like to do is I'd like to correct that a little bit. So after I select the Hero 7 Black here, I'm going to drag this distortion label around a little bit, and I'm going to figure out what I like for the horizon. Now this is your artistic freedom here. You can select if you want the horizon to look perfectly level, something like that, or if you want it to have a little bit of a bend to it, or a lot of bend to it. That is up to you. It's going to largely depend on how you shot your night lapse. Did you have the camera pointed straight up at the sky, or did you have it including some horizon? That's going to make the difference here. In my case, I'm going to remove a little bit of that distortion, and I'm going to set it at 70 right here. After I've done that, I'm then gonna go back up here and start adjusting these other settings. So for the temperature, I'm going to put that to 4000K. That right there, that's gonna be the native level that I shot this night lapse in. For night lapses, you could also do 3200K if you want a little bit more blue to the sky. I recommend either 3200K or 4000K, but in my case, I'm going to go with 4000K. I'm going to leave tint alone in this case, but if you wanted to, you could adjust this to give either a little more of that bluish green color to the sky or a little bit more of that pinkish purple look. In this case, Lightroom defaulted to 20. For this, I'm gonna leave it at that. It's kind of a neutral look to the sky, but it still allows the Milky Way to show well in this area. The next settings I'm gonna go through are settings that I generally adjust when I'm working on a night lapse. There's a lot of settings you can adjust to get the exact results you want, but in my case, I'm gonna focus on the core 10 or so settings that I adjust. So the first setting I look at is exposure. You can add back a little bit of light to the sky. If you do that too much though, you're gonna see a ton of noise. That's the nature of a night lapse. So with exposure, I usually don't underexpose any further. I usually keep it at least at the 0, but sometimes I will add a little bit of light back to the sky. In this case, I'm gonna do 0.10. That gives a little bit more brightness there without adding too much noise. Contrast, I generally adjust that a little bit. Generally, I'm gonna add around 20, plus 20 on that. As you can see, if you drag contrast this way or all the way up this way, it's gonna give you a lot different results. In my case, I like to bring it up slightly. So yes, I'm gonna do 20 here. But again, you can play around with these to get the best results that you like. For highlights, I'm gonna look at this. Generally, I'm gonna bring the highlights up slightly. That's gonna bring out a little more of the detail in the sky. So I'm gonna do plus 10 there. Shadows, I generally don't mess with a whole lot. Again, you can drag this around a little. Obviously, if you do that, that looks utterly terrible because bringing the shadows up to plus 100 takes away everything. But if you put them down to negative 100, it usually looks a little bit dark. So in this case, I'm going to keep the shadows at 0. I'm not gonna mess with those at all. I like how that looks with those. With the whites, I'm gonna bring that up a little bit. Generally, I'm gonna do around 15 when I'm shooting a night lapse without any moon in the sky. And for the blacks, I'm gonna generally tweak that ever so slightly. Now, it's gonna depend on what I have in my foreground. In this case, there's a little bit of mist on the ground that you can see down here. And I kind of want that to show a little bit because that looks pretty cool. So I'm gonna bring the blacks up slightly. I'm gonna do 10 initially, but I'd like to bring it up a little bit more. So I'm gonna do 20. And that's about how I like it for this one. For the texture setting, you can adjust this a little bit. It's gonna make it a little more crisp, but I don't recommend adjusting it too much because it's gonna make it, it's gonna make that noise stand out a little bit more than you probably want it to. So for texture, I'm gonna do plus 5 on this. For clarity, you could bring that up a little bit. That's gonna help bring out the crispness also. But at the same time, you're gonna have a little bit of noise there to deal with. So for clarity, drag that around, see what you like. For clarity, I generally am gonna do about plus 5 on that as well. For dehaze, I'm gonna leave that alone. We don't generally wanna mess with that for a night lapse. For vibrance and saturation, I'm gonna leave those both at 0. We can tweak those a little bit down here further with some of these specific colors if we want to. So down here are the specific colors that you can saturate with. Just make sure saturation is selected here. Sometimes I'll bring up the green and the purple a little bit because sometimes those are colors that you see in the Milky Way. So purple and green, I'm gonna both bring those up to about 40. Magenta I'll bring up as well to around that same level. The blues you have to be careful with because blue is that primary color in the sky. Obviously, if you oversaturate, you kind of get a messy pattern here. It doesn't look the best. So blues, I generally like to bring those up maybe around 30 or so. Again, depending on the night lapse and what you're what your white balance is set at and what the color of the sky is. And then aqua, I will sometimes bring up a little bit as well. In this case, aqua doesn't make much of a difference except in this region. So aqua, I'm going to set that to plus 30. And then sometimes the yellows and the orange, depending on your sky as well. In this case, as you can see, dragging it back and forth, it doesn't really make a lot of difference. So I'm going to leave that alone right there. So next, we're going to go down here to the noise reduction section. That is very important. We want to try to smooth this out as much as possible without losing the detail of the stars. So for noise reduction, where it says luminance here, I'm going to drag this up all the way to 100 initially. Now, as you can see, that made this really smooth, but we also lost a lot of star details in that sky. So what we want to do next is we want to go to detail, and we want to drag that up all the way to 100. As you can see, when we do that, we get a lot of the stars in the Milky Way pattern back, but a lot of that noise is missing now, which is great. That's what we're going for. Contrast, we could drag that up as well. Depending on the night lapse, sometimes you can bring contrast all the way up to 100 and it'll still look good. In this case, it kind of does a weird noise and messy pattern here when I drag it all the way up to 100. So in this case, I'm going to set it to approximately 70. I like how 70 looks, so I'm going to leave it there. For the noise reduction with color, I'm going to bring color all the way up to 100 as well. And then detail, I'm going to bring that also to 100. And then smoothness, you can bring that all the way up here to 100, or you can drag it all the way back to 0. Generally, I don't like putting it to 0 because, again, it has a weird pattern with the noise in the sky. So smoothness, I want to bring up a good bit. Sometimes I will have it entirely at 100. In this case, I think it does look best at 100. But if you don't like anywhere 0 to 100 on this, you can bring back the detail a little bit, and that will tend to help. So I'm going to drag this around a little bit. In this case, I do like the detail at 100, and I do like the smoothness at 100. I think that gives me my best results. So once I have done those key settings, those are the ones that I'm going to adjust on it. You're free to mess around with a lot of other settings here. You could mess with the tone curves if you wanted to. I'm going to show you an example of that. But generally, I find these don't help me a whole lot with night lapses. But sometimes if you adjust these and mess around a little bit, you can get some pretty good results. As you can see there, the darks makes a huge difference on here, depending on how you drag it. The darks is the one that I commonly will adjust if I'm going to adjust one of these a little bit. As you can see, when I bring it up here, you do see a lot more of the Milky Way detail here. But at the same time, you kind of get a weird, noisy look in the rest of the sky. So for the darks, I'm going to adjust that up to plus 25. And that looks like a little bit too much, so I'm going to go back to plus 20. And then shadows here, if you were to drag that, as you can see, that has a pretty big impact as well. Shadows in this case, I'm going to keep at 0. I like that best. Once you have made all of your adjustments on this single photo, you're going to go down here, and if you're on Windows, you're going to hit Control A, and it's going to select all 833 photos. And then what you're going to do is you're going to right click, you're going to go to Develop Settings, and you're going to click Sync Settings. You're going to make sure Check All is selected, and then you're going to click Synchronize. And up here, you're going to see pasting settings. In my case, it's going really quick on this computer. This is a pretty powerful computer, so it'll do stuff quite quickly. And you'll see down here, your previews will start to fill in with all the adjustments you've made. And what I recommend is I recommend clicking through a couple of these photos just to make sure you like how everything looks. So usually I will go close to the end just to make sure everything's still looking good for me down there. And I still like how that looks here. It looks really good in the sky. And also the lights from the ground, I like how those look as well here. I think that's a pretty neat setup. So finally, I'm going to go back to the beginning here, some of the beginning photos, and just make sure that looks good as well. So obviously my introductory photos are going to be pretty quick here. Those are going to vanish quickly when I have my night lapse. So I'm going to go in a little bit here. And this would be as the sky was starting to get dark around 9:30 p.m. So I really like how that looks as well. So once I'm happy with these results, I'm going to, once again, make sure Control A, that all the photos are selected. And I'm going to click Export right here. And I'm going to select same folder as original photo, but I'm going to have it put into a subfolder. In this case, I'm going to name that folder Edited. And then I'm going to go down here. I'm going to make sure the image format is JPEG, that the color space is sRGB, and that the quality is set to 100. The rest of these settings you can generally leave alone. They're not going to affect anything. And then you're going to click Export. And it's going to say preparing to export. And then once the export begins, you're going to see the status up here, export 833 files. So I'm going to temporarily stop this recording because that export is going to take a little while. Generally, I find it'll take about 20 minutes for every 1,000 files. So in this case, it's probably going to take around 15 to 17 minutes to export all 833. It could vary depending on the processing power of your computer, but generally that's how long it takes on here. So I'm going to let this finish and then I'll be right back. All right, now that my export has finished, I'm going to close out of Lightroom Classic and I'm going to proceed to open Adobe Premiere Pro. And I'm going to show you my workflow that I use in Premiere Pro. Like I said before, you could use DaVinci Resolve, you could use Final Cut Pro, you could use a lot of other editing options, and those also will work well for you. So I'm going to go up here to New Project, put this in the Night Lapse folder. And for the sake of this project, I'm going to call it Night Lapse. I'm going to hit OK. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to File, New, and Sequence. And I'm going to adjust the sequence settings. In this case, I want the finished product to be 4K. So I'm going to do 3840 by 2160. And then I'm going to make sure the time base is 23.976. That'll be 24 frames per second. The rest of these settings we can leave alone. And I'm going to hit OK. Next, I'm going to go up here to File. I'm going to select Import. I'm going to navigate to the folder that has the night lapse. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the first photo, and then I'm going to select Image Sequence. Now, something to note. In this case, my photos start with G0033. But if I had so many photos here that it went from G00 to 4 as the first number, in other words, to 40,000, it would not import as part of the sequence. So what I would have to do is I would have to import this first batch, and then I would have to go back and import the second batch starting with G00, 4, etc. However, in this case, I don't have to worry about that because I have plenty of numbering left before it would hit 40,000. So I'm going to hit Open. And it's going to import right here. As you can see, that's our preview. So I'm going to drag this to the timeline. And it's going to give you this message because the clip, the actual photos are going to be in 5.3K resolution. So for now, I'm going to click Keep Existing Settings. Now, as you can see, this is super zoomed in on that because of the resolution of this being 5.3K, but our timeline being 4K. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and go to Set to Frame Size. Now, as you can see, when it goes to frame size, there are the borders around the side here. And that's because the photos are in a 4:3 resolution, but 4K is 16:9. So what we're going to do here is we're going to zoom in. We're going to go up to here to scale. It's currently 51.7, and I'm going to put in 69. 69 is going to be the exact amount that it needs to fill out the side borders here to make it the 16:9 version of this photo. But we now have some room because there's extra photo at the top here and extra photo at the bottom. So what we can do here is we can adjust the position of the photo where it says 1080. If you want it to include more of the ground, you can go lower. So in this case, when I go to 800, it includes more of the ground. But if I wanted to include more of the sky, I need to go above 1080. So I'm going to do 1200 here. Now it's a good idea to keep some type of horizon in your time lapse, unless you're shooting straight up and you have trees along the side here, which can look cool as well. But in my case, I want a little bit more horizon than that, so I'm going to go to 1100. And I still want a little bit more because I like this mist and fog down at the ground. So I'm going to go to 1050. That looks good right there. I'm going to stick with that. Now, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here and render it so then I can see my preview. So it's rendering right now. Render times are pretty quick on this computer because I have a NVIDIA RTX 3080, which does a lot of that rendering for me. It's a great graphics card. But the CPU also will assist if you don't have a good graphics card. So as long as you have a powerful enough CPU, the rendering time won't take too long. Especially since, as you can see, it's 833 frames because each frame is one individual photo. So I'm going to let it render here, and then I'm going to show you the preview. All right, so that's our preview right there. That looks really good. I like that. Now, I feel like it's a little bit slow. It would be nice if it was a little bit faster. So what I can do here is I can stop this. I like that fog at the ground, by the way. That fog and mist, really neat. I'm going to stop it, and I'm going to put the speed up to 300. That's going to make it 3 times faster. After I've done that, I'm going to go back and render once more. All right, I like that speed much better now. Now you of course can adjust the speed as you would like. Sometimes you may have a shorter night lapse and you might want it a slower speed. Other times, if it's a longer one, you might want to make it like 500, 600, 800%, or even 1000% faster. In this case, I like that 300%, so I'm going to leave it there. And now it's time to export it. If this is not part of another project and you just want the night lapse as a separate video, you're going to go up to File, you're going to select Export, and you're going to select Media. And I'm going to give it a name. In this case, I'm going to name it Night Lapse. And I'm going to click Save. And then I'm going to click Match Source. I'm going to render at maximum depth. And I'm going to do VBR 2-pass, and I'm going to put the bitrate to 100, because oftentimes I'm going to be working with other GoPro footage with this, and I definitely want the bitrate at 100 when I'm working with GoPro footage. Of course, if you put the bitrate higher, it is going to give you a higher file size. So if you want a smaller file, if you put the bitrate at the 10 and the maximum bitrate at 12, it's going to make a much smaller file. It's going to only be 14 megabytes in size. But if you do the 100 bitrate like I'm doing, it's going to be 145. So it's going to be 10 times the size. You can play around with that. There's no absolute right or wrong with that. It's going to be more what your preference is. And then finally, I'm going to click Export. And Premiere Pro is going to export this pretty quickly. And then at that point, your video is going to be finished. It's going to be ready for you to share on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram, or any other social media or sharing option that you prefer. I hope you found this tutorial to be helpful. You can use this with GoPro night lapses or essentially with any night lapse. It doesn't just have to be the GoPro camera. I highly recommend using the photo mode with RAW. Anytime you are shooting a night lapse, it's going to give you the most flexibility and the best results. If you haven't already seen my GoPro night lapse tutorial, I've linked to it above. You can check it out. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those below. Please subscribe and hit that bell notification button, and you'll receive a notification every time I publish a new video. Until we talk again, happy night lapsing.